How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about Separation from 2021. This is directed by William Brent Bell and stars Rupert Friend. Separation, this is the one with the really cool monster design. I saw the trailer and wanted to watch it, but I kept forgetting what this movie was called. This is a case of a movie that had an interesting concept, but boy, was it hard to keep that title in my head. I also had this for the movie Annihilation, one of those titles that I just couldn't remember if they'd called it anything else but a generic one-word title that doesn't really seem to fit with, what you remember the movie for. Not that they should have called this, evil cartoon creatures, but at least I would have remembered that. But yeah, I had heard, several critics were saying that it wasn't really good, but I saw those creature designs in the trailer and I had to check it out. So, is it good or not? Well, let's go ahead and dive into that. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the plot. No major spoilers, but I do want to say my piece on a few plot points, and I do want you guys to have a basic understanding as to what this movie's about, but I'm not going to spoil anything big. That being said, let's dive in, and we open up with parents getting a divorce, a mom and dad, and there's a little daughter involved. You see, the dad is a comic book artist that has been out of work for 3 years. He had some success in the past, but now he spends a lot of his time with the daughter, and the two have a really good relationship. The mom has been working for her very, very insanely rich father, and it's pulling in income for the family, but in turn, she doesn't get to see the daughter hardly ever because she's at work all the time. Now, the mom, as they go about these divorces, starts to get pretty darn evil, almost to the point of cartoonishly evil. You see, not only does she want full custody, but she's talking about moving all the way across the country just so the dad doesn't see his daughter again, which is pretty dang evil. You see, in her own words, she says, it's because she's mine. And, I get separation and I get having most of the custody, but, this guy who has a really good relationship with his daughter, and you're wanting to make sure he doesn't even get to see her at all, that's pretty far. Now, she's being pretty evil, but we know from the trailer, and if we can just follow, basic idea of what's going to happen next in a horror movie like this, we know she's going to die, and she's crossing the road several times, and at the beginning of the movie, it's kind of funny because you're like, okay, she's going to get hit by a car, when is it going to happen? And every time she's crossing the road, you're like, is it going to be now? Is it going to be now? And I mean, there's sometimes, especially early on in horror movies, when someone unexpectedly getting hit by a car was like this big, scary thing. But now it's kind of become a cliche where anytime anyone in a horror movie crosses the road, you're like, oh, are they going to get hit by a car? And so she does, and she dies. It's a pretty, cool stunt there. And she's dead, and the dad gets the custody back, a grim way of going about things, but at least he has his daughter. Or so it would seem. You see, the grandfather is very angry about his daughter dying, and because she was trying to get custody before she died, the grandfather has taken up this request, and even though it's harder for a grandfather to get custody than the wife, he has a lot of money and can sort of bully his way into this. On top of that, the daughter is becoming kind of distant. She's using this baby talk that's unlike her, and she's kind of pulling away, and she starts to talk to these imaginary friends, which is kind of the bulk of this movie. You see, the dad, being a comic book artist, also made these little toys for his daughter, these little puppets, and think like a Tim Burton type style, these cool, creepy characters that could feel right at home in A Nightmare Before Christmas. And she starts to see life-size versions of some of these characters, and one of them may be the vengeful spirit of the girl's mom come back to get to her daughter. And let's go ahead and talk a bit about the pros of this movie. First and foremost, there are some good characters in this. The dad and the daughter have a really strong relationship, and it's good to see these two, they'll draw with each other and talk to each other and feel really honest with each other, and you can see the dad really does, care about her. Those are some really good characters. You also get a babysitter in this movie that has a few interesting character things with her going on, and she's kind of, the person that gets wrapped up in the spiritual craziness. But you also, the outsider. But you also, the best character. You get the best character in this movie. He needs work, so he goes to his friend who owns a big comic book company just to get, an entry-level position, so he has some money coming in. And he winds up working with this crazy comic writer. He's big into the spiritual, and in turn can give him some exposition as to what might be going on with the ghost. But you get him, and he'll talk about all these crazy spiritual things. It's almost like influences from, like, say, Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore. The comic book writer that's kind of into the weirder stuff there, and he's a very fun and interesting character to follow. If you gave him his own spin-off movie, I would totally watch this. He's the best part of the movie, other than the monsters, which I guess we should get into next. This movie, regardless of what anyone else criticizes it for, the monster design in this movie is A++. This is really, really good creature design. You have drawings, which are also puppets, and if those weren't good, then the later creature design wouldn't be. But you get these weird characters, and then you get life-size versions of them, not like big puppets, because the proportions are more human, but you could tell from the makeup and heavy prosthetics that these are influenced by the puppets, but proportional human-sized creatures. You get one guy, the one you've probably seen in the trailer, the zebra-striped man who does a bunch of circus contortions, who, by the way, it seems like is mostly practical, which I have to give major props, because this movie does lots of cool stuff with creature design, and a lot of it seems to be practical. There's obviously digital stuff, but it's not like this guy could easily have just been a CGI monster, and they did it mostly practically, and that's pretty good. You also get the one the mom is, and it's got this cool, almost like carved wood, all messed up looking doll face that might be a mask going over her face in a big cartoonish dress. They're pretty cool. Now, even though you see that there's a bunch of these characters, you get primarily the mom character, which makes sense, and then you get part of the zebra stripe man. He's only in there for a little bit, but you think there'd be a lot more of these monsters, because they designed a bunch of cool characters, and it's primarily just the one. It's one of those things that it makes sense, but I would have loved to see more of these cool characters, because they are really, really cool designs. And also, the third pro, the story is pretty good. It's your classic story. You get love and betrayal, you get greed, you get rich old men, and now what does that sound like? Especially bear in mind that the dad works at a comic book company. These are very Tales from the Crypt / creep show ways of telling a story. All the rich old men, the couple that's fighting with each other, betrayal and stuff. There's a lot of Tales from the Crypt elements, especially when you look at these really cool monster designs. And I really do have to like that, but let's go ahead and go into the cons, and that's really, this does transition into the cons quite nicely, and that's when you looked at Tales from the Crypt, and then it would inspire Creepshow, and then Tales from the Crypt would also get its own show later on. What did those things have with them? Energy and creativity. And this is where the biggest con of this movie comes into, is there's not that much energy in this movie. And you look at the shots and the colors, so much of this movie is this cold blue, really just, calm and stoic, and that doesn't fit the energy of these crazy characters. You can tell that if they didn't have these crazy characters, this would have been a boring shadow people movie. And a lot of this movie, as far as tone and cinematography, feels like it wants to be a boring shadow people movie. And then it has this layer of Tales from the Crypt that is significantly more interesting placed on top of it. But because that's what this movie wants to be, you can see that it's really not using the Tales from the Crypt element as well as it could be, and these elements feel like they're placed over a different movie. Like, when the character first shows up, the first time you see one of these characters, he's just walking down the hall and it kind of happens. A lot of the times when these characters show up, there's no build-up to these characters, no suspenseful thing. You don't hear a sound, you don't see the room get darker, you don't see the characters start to panic. There's no build-up, and in fact, when the characters are seen by most of the main humans, there's not that much of a reaction, you know, and you get the dad kind of asking out of the way, you know, to the comic book friend about ghosts and spirits, but you don't really get scenes where he's screaming or out of his mind or, you know, not really knowing how to tell people about this. And, you know, you think that they would react more, and they really don't, and it's really odd. I guess you could say, you know, in case a lawyer is watching, he doesn't want to lose custody of his daughter because he's insane, but they never explain that, and it seems like they're just like, oh yeah, there's ghosts, huh, that's weird. And you think you'd get a bigger reaction, and you don't. And also, there's several times where the ghosts show up just to show up, and you're like, okay, what is this ghost trying to do? Why is it trying to be scary? There is a scene with a bed sheet and a scene where they're on a window up top that do have clear motive for the ghost and do provide something spooky to go on. But there's several scenes where the ghosts are just there to be there, and you're like, what is the ghost trying to do? This is also a horror movie without very many kills. There's only a few deaths in this movie, and in turn the ghost can't do that, so that's one spooky thing they can't do. And just the frightening sequences, there's not really much for them to do, and a lot of times they're just there, and I wish they had, you know, more creativity in what these ghosts were doing. And, you know, they just kind of show up, and in turn the movie's not really scary. And all this being said, the monsters are very well designed, very cool, scary monsters. They're just not given a lot to do, and that's really sad. You feel like these characters were really, really underutilized. But yeah, that being said, there is a lot of good stuff with this movie. I just wish this was given to someone like Tom Holland instead, you know? Like, there were cool characters, there was a Tales from the Crypt-esque plot, and, you know, you'd want this to be an on-fire, bonkers movie, but you really get a muted and subdued movie with a much more interesting movie just placed right on top of it, and I really don't know what happened and how it got so mixed-matched, but, you know, there were characters you cared for, and there was interesting enough stuff, and I think just for the character design alone, this movie might get a cult following. It's just a shame that there's so much of the movie that really wants to be one of those boring shadow people, vague yet mysterious ghost entity movies, you know, that are just really boring, and it's, you know, a normal, standard, boring horror movie with a very interesting element placed on top of this, and I just saw this movie and it was frustrating that they didn't really go for it the whole time, you know. So you had cool characters, especially, you know, the dad, the daughter, the comic book writer. You had cool monsters. It just didn't really swing for the fences, and I really wish it would have, because there's a lot of good stuff going for this. It just didn't push itself as far as it should. But anyway, is it worth watching? If you can see this movie for cheap somewhere, or if you're really wanting to see a horror movie. I know right now you have basically this and The Unholy that are in theaters right now, and it's okay enough, but don't go super out of your way for it. But like if you see this on streaming later on, it's probably fine if you have nothing else to watch. It's one of those that's frustrating because the good elements are so good, but it doesn't push them, and it just kind of gets to me. But the good parts were good, but underneath it all, there's just that flat horror movie, and I really wish, with all this good stuff, that it did go for it. But anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You're really helping the channel out. I'll put a relevant playlist on the bottom if you want to see more. You can click there to see more. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon.